This is the story of the most technically gifted skateboarder who ever lived, and how he spent nearly 2 decades on the outside of the sport he had already revolutionized. Rodney Mullen invented more of modern skateboarding's vocabulary than anyone in history, and he did it almost entirely alone, on flat ground in empty parking lots, while the rest of the skating world moved in a completely different direction. Rodney Mullen started skating in Florida in the late 1970s, at a time when the sport's center of gravity was firmly in California, built around vert ramps and drained swimming pools. Mullen had none of that. What he had was flat pavement, an analytical mind, and an almost obsessive drive to break down movement into its component parts. Where other skaters were chasing height and speed, Mullen treated the skateboard itself like a puzzle, asking not how fast can I go, but what is actually possible with 4 wheels and a piece of wood. This mindset made him a dominant force in freestyle skateboarding, a discipline built around technical tricks performed on flat ground rather than ramps or pools. By his teenage years, Mullen was already the best freestyle skater in the world, winning competition after competition through the early 1980s. But freestyle occupied a strange position in skate culture. It was technically demanding, often more difficult than anything happening on a ramp, but it lacked the visual drama and rebellious energy that defined vert skating's rising popularity. Freestyle skaters got respected for their skill and often overlooked for everything else. What Mullen did during this period would end up mattering more than any competition trophy. Working largely in isolation, he began developing tricks that had never existed before. The flat ground ollie, allowing a skater to pop the board into the air without a ramp, the kickflip, flipping the board beneath his feet mid-air, the impossible, a physics-defying wrap of the board around the ankle, the 360 flip, combining rotation and flip in a single motion. Nearly every trick considered fundamental to modern street skating traces directly back to something Mullen either invented or substantially refined during these years. What makes this even more remarkable is that Mullen developed most of these tricks without any real audience or immediate application for them. Street skating as a discipline barely existed yet. He wasn't inventing tricks to win competitions or impress crowds, he was solving a technical problem for its own sake, driven by a kind of perfectionism that pushed him to understand exactly why a trick worked at a mechanical level, not just how to land it. That mindset, breaking movement down to its underlying physics, is part of why his tricks proved so durable and so easy for other skaters to build on later. By the mid-1980s, the skateboarding industry was shifting hard towards street and vert skating, and freestyle's popularity collapsed almost as fast as it had risen. Contests dried up, sponsors moved their money elsewhere. Mullen, despite being arguably the most technically advanced skater alive, found himself the best in the world at a discipline that was quietly dying around him. This period could have ended his career entirely. Instead, it forced a transition that would end up defining the rest of skateboarding history. As street skating emerged in the mid to late 1980s, driven by skaters looking for terrain after ramps and pools became inaccessible, Mullen's flat ground vocabulary turned out to be exactly what the discipline needed. Tricks he had built for freestyle competitions translated almost perfectly onto curbs, stairs, and parking blocks. He didn't have to reinvent himself so much as watch the rest of skateboarding catch up to where he already was. Mullen's transition into street skating accelerated dramatically when he partnered with World Industries, the rebellious skater-owned company founded by Steve Rocco in the late 1980s. The partnership made sense on paper and even more sense in practice. World Industries needed technical credibility to match its provocative marketing, and Mullen needed a platform that could put his flat ground innovations in front of a street skating audience that was rapidly becoming the center of the sport. Through World Industries and its associated brands, Mullen's influence spread through skate videos that circulated among riders worldwide. These weren't polished mainstream productions, they were raw, low-budget tapes that traveled by word of mouth and physical copying, and within that underground network, Mullen's technical vocabulary became the shared foundation that an entire generation of street skaters learned from. Skaters who had never freestyle competed, who had no idea what freestyle even was, were nonetheless building their entire style on tricks Mullen had invented years earlier for a discipline that no longer existed. What's striking about Mullen's influence is how invisible it became. Unlike Tony Hawk, whose vert career and later mainstream fame made him instantly recognizable even outside skateboarding, Mullen operated largely behind the scenes for much of his career, more architect than performer. He kept competing and filming through the 1990s, but his greatest impact wasn't measured in trophies or fame. It was measured in how thoroughly his ideas had become invisible, baked so deeply into the fundamentals of street skating that most skaters using his tricks had no idea where they originated. This is in some ways the defining irony of Mullen's career. He spent his early years as an outsider, dominating a discipline the industry considered secondary. He spent his later years as an invisible foundation, his innovation so completely absorbed into mainstream street skating that his name became disconnected from the tricks he created. Being simultaneously the most influential and most under-recognized figure in skateboarding history is a strange, singular position, and it's one Mullen occupied for the better part of 2 decades. Ronnie Mullen's story isn't really about competitions won or tricks landed, even though the list of both is staggering. It's about what happens when someone treats a marginalized discipline with total seriousness, refining it obsessively even as the world around them moves on to something else, and then watching the world eventually circle back and discover that the outsider had already solved the problem everyone else was still chasing. Nearly every street skater alive today is, whether they know it or not, speaking a language Mullen built alone on flat pavement during years when almost nobody else was paying attention.